Perfect. Hello, welcome on.
Hello.
So great to meet you face to face. Well, sort of face to face. Meet you.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
so great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. We're really hoping to make an impact with our organization. We're so thankful to have you as a part of this very first inaugural event. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, any identities you would like to share, and just a little bit about you for all of the viewers watching.
Sure. Estonko, Hesjela, Jadoga, Muskoki, Hokodogame, Anathkabahuitla. Greetings, welcome. My name is Roger Kuhn. I am Porch Creek. I'm part of the Wind Clan, and I identify as Two Spirit. I use he, him pronouns, and in my professional work, I am a psychotherapist, a sex educator, a professor, and also a musician. And I just published my very first book called Soma Cultural Liberation.
That is so much. You are very similar to me in that you do a lot of things all at once. You just going, going, going.
That's right.
Can't sit still type of personality. So some of our audience may not be aware of what Two Spirit means. How would you define that for us?
Two Spirit is, in the broadest sense that I can use, um, is we use the term umbrella term that encapsulates gender and sexual orientation variance amongst indigenous folks, primarily those that come from the North American continent. That would include what we now refer to as Canada, the United States of America, Mexico, and Central America. Though the term Two Spirit is also now being used also by South American indigenous folks. And I've also heard the term being used for indigenous folks in Australia and New Zealand as well. Although the term was originally coined in 1990 by Dr. Myra Laramie, who's from the Fisher River Cree Nation. And the term came about to push back up against anthropological terminology that was being used really since the invasion. And the word that was prior used was called berdache. And that is a French Persian word, a French word with Persian roots. That basically, when you translate it, it means like kept boy or male sexual slave, depending on the translation. And so this is the word that anthropologists were using for folks like myself. They would have said, "Oh, Roger Kuhn's a badash." So these activists got together and they're like, "You ain't gonna be calling me no hoe, the rest of my life." So it's a way that actually we took back. Not we. I wasn't a part of it. I was still a little baby at that point. But this amazing group of activists took control of the colonizers' language and said, "We're not going to allow you to call us something we are not. We'll use a term that best suits who we are." It comes from the northern Algonquin word "niitsmanidoag," which means, when you define it, two spirits. And it's meant to signify what we understand from a Western lens as male and female genders. But we have to think beyond that. It's not male, female, it's not binary. Think of it more as a circle. Two spirit is circular. That's my belief about gender in general. It's not a binary. That's where I think we get so confused and we get stuck. Is, are you a boy, a girl, a man, or a woman? I'm none of those things, and I am all of them at the same time. That's two spirit.
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard it described like that. My understanding that it was just kind of, and I come from a very colonized perspective as well. And my impression of it was that it was just kind of a word to explain the things that we already have words for, but it's
Mm.
actually something completely different. So it has been explained to me before as um, the Native American term for gender and sexuality variance. But I'm saying it's a lot more than that. It's actually um, it's much deeper. It's much more cultural than that. Which
Yeah, and I would take it even a step further. And one is to say that two spirit is sort of like the collective word, though not all, though a lot of tribal communities have a word for two spirit in the language. Like in Muskoki, we say anaskaba or anaskaba huitla. And that word really doesn't mean anything about gender, though it means in the middle. that is the word for in the middle. And that's the word that we have chosen to give to folks like me, because we may have lost the word through colonization. So that's just what some folks are using. It's also the word that we use in the Muskogee language for Wednesday. So there's that. But it actually makes, to me, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I've always felt like I'm in the middle. And because my identity, and because of the identity of every single Indigenous person that you've ever met in your life, is inherently political, Two-Spirit is a political term as well, because our identity as Indigenous people is political, because we are the only racialized group in the United States that has to prove our existence within a specific racial group to the United States government. So that's why I say we are still under colonial rule, because we still have to do these things that other racial groups do not have to do. Two-Spirit is a collective political term that we can use to identify one another, and also to say we have the right for self-determination and sovereignty.
And how did you come to identify as Two-Spirit? Is this something that was instilled in you as a kid, or is it something that you kind of found later on in life that you really resonated with?
Well, as a child, I grew up on the plains of North Dakota, and I have an incredibly loving mother who always told me to identify as Native first. And I think she also recognized as a little kid that I was probably different than the other kids my age, that I liked all kinds of things. I grew up in the 80s, so I loved like He-Man and Thundercats, but I also loved Cabbage Patch Kids and Barbie dolls and Jem and the Holograms and My Little Pony, Strawberry Shortcake. We could keep going, Monte I loved all those things. And as I grew older, I began to really feel isolated in who I was as a human being. And everybody else kept telling me that I was gay. Everybody around me said, "Oh, you're gay," and in really pejorative ways. And I was just like, I just don't think that's right. I mean, I kind of am attracted to all kinds of people, not just to people that have penises. And gay just didn't feel exactly like it described me, because when I would see gayness represented like in culture on TV, I would say like, well, that's not me. Because one, my body didn't look like that, meaning my skin didn't look like that, right? And I didn't really see myself in that sort of larger circuit party gay world that we're kind of brought up to believe that's what gay is. And um, it wasn't until I moved to New York City in my early 20s that I met another person who identified as Two-Spirit. I was actually at an event for Native Americans who are Native American artists, musicians, singers, etc. in New York City. I was at this event, and I met this Two-Spirit person named Patrick, and we were chatting, getting to know one another. And Patrick was like, "You're a Two-Spirit, aren't you?" And I was like, "What do you? I do not know what that means." And he says, "Oh," he gave me a wink, and he's like, "It just means you're like me." And I immediately knew what Patrick meant by that. And I was like, "There's a what? There's a word for this?" And Patrick's was like, "Come with me to this meeting next week." And the next week I went to a meeting. I walked into this room, and there was like 5 other people that looked like me. And I mean, my jaw hit the floor, and I was like, I did not even know that this existed. And my entire life changed. Everything about my life, everything I felt like I ever knew, just changed in that moment. And then within, I think, another 2 weeks, I was on a plane going to Oklahoma to my first Two-Spirit gathering. And that was when I was around 25. I'm in my late 40s now. So for over 20 years, I've been part of this amazing community, and I've made it a part of my life's work to give back to this community through education, resourcing, doing opportunities like this, chatting with you, to help educate not only my community, but others about the beauty of Two-Spirit, and about how, although we are thriving in many ways, we are still struggling against the power of colonization, oppression, and marginalization.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really like touching story. It's really interesting. I always find it interesting to hear how people kind of came about and like found themselves in this community, especially.
Yeah.
And I will say it's definitely different from mine, but it resonated with me.
Mm,
Um, my first, I grew up religious in
mm.
a very religious conservative home,
And,
and
and what state
none
were
of
you in, Robin?
Georgia.
Oh, okay. So Georgia,
Yeah.
if you did not know, that's Muskogee territory. That's my homeland territory. Georgia, Alabama, Northern Florida. That's all from those are my people there. My reservations in Alabama, but that whole territory, that's Muskogee territory.
Wow, I did not know that. Um, I admit that I know very little about that, and I should learn more. Absolutely. Um, I I was grew up being told that I was part Cherokee, which is a very common
Mm,
thing
hmm
in Georgia, and I found out quite recently that it's actually usually was passed down as kind of a story from older generations who didn't want to be perceived as racist, so that they would claim that there
mm,
was a small
mm.
amount of Cherokee within your family, and that most likely that's not even true. I was like, wow, that's unfortunate. But
Well,
yeah,
there would be that region of the United States would have had Cherokee people in it. Even though I say it's Muskogee territory, Muskogee and Cherokee folk are very similar. We are part of what the United States called the five civilized tribes, right? So like the folks that were forcibly removed to Oklahoma back in the day, in the late 19th century, that whole territory, Creek. Well, what really is Muskogee, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, we have a lot of similarities in common. And one of the reasons why so many folks use the term Cherokee is likely because the Cherokee Nation is the second largest Native nation in the country. And one of the arguments that some folks have, it's none of my business. I'm not Cherokee, so I don't like to get into Cherokee's business. Though one of the arguments that people have is that Cherokees have a relatively low enrollment blood quotient level, right? So that's all. I mean, even that stuff like that's like anytime we talk about blood quotient, we're getting colonial there. So the fact that your family may have had that lore, maybe there was an ancestor way, way, way back in the day. That may be possible because of the region that you all were in.
mhm,
Though the challenge for that, right, is that folks who may have had or may have like a distant native relative, it's like you don't have the lived experience of a native person. So
yeah,
unless you are what's called a reconnecting native, my belief is that like, well, why would you call yourself native? Not you, Robin, but like people in general. It's sort of like, well, why would you use that term like on a, like Elizabeth Warren, for example, when she was claiming Cherokee on her applications? It's like, well, why would you claim that? They don't claim you. You have no ties to that nation. You do nothing for that nation, and yet you want to benefit off of the blood of those people. That's always what's tripped me out. It's the same for me. It's sort of like my grandfather was also part black. So, but I don't say that I'm black because I've never had that experience. I've never
yeah,
lived my life as a black person. So even though if you go through my blood and be like, wow, Roger Kuhn's part black, well, it's in my ancestry. Though again, I wasn't raised that way. We don't deny it, but it was just we're native folks who also are mixed with white and black. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Going back to the similarities, uh, I was gonna say that I found it resonated. Your story resonated with me slightly. Um, I didn't grow up learning about any of these terms. I didn't know really what trans meant.
Mm,
I only knew what gay meant because my aunt was gay, and it was highly frowned upon, like very frowned upon. It was just they weren't allowed to hold hands or kiss in front of my brother and I or anything like that if they wanted to be a part of our lives. And um, so we were watching A Wrinkle in Time when I was like
mm,
probably 14 or 15. And there's one character in there that describes themselves as a happy medium. And when they're asked if they are male or female, they say, I'm neither, I'm a happy medium. And I remember like my mind getting blown in that moment. I turned to my mom and I was like, oh my gosh, I get that.
Oh.
Whoa,
Mm.
something happened with my computer. I was like, whoa, I get that. That is so that fits perfectly. And I remember very distinctly her being like, no, that is wrong, that is bad. Like, there are no happy mediums. You're either a boy or a
Mm.
girl. There's nothing else. And I just remember, like, even though we had that conversation, the overwhelming feeling of like someone else out there has thought of this, has experienced this because it has appeared
Mm.
in this media. That means that it's out there and I can find it, even if I didn't
Yes.
get to find that for a while after that. Yeah, the representation there was so important for me to see
Mm-hmm.
as a young teen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's you know, I had a similar experience to you in that like you said your jaw dropped when you entered that room of people. You were like, oh my gosh, there's more of us. And I think that's the part that resonated the most with me is like the understanding that we're not the only one. Like it's out there,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to find it. And that was just so incredibly important to me.
Mm-hmm. You know, you reminded me. I have some two spirit friends who are um, younger in age, and the other day, one of them, her name is Morgan. She posted this really lovely video of her and her friends hanging out together, and it actually brought a tear to my eye because just to see these young two spirit and trans folks just enjoying their lives, living their lives, celebrating their lives. I was like, this is what I want to go on social media to see. I want to see young two spirit transgender nonconforming people celebrating and living their lives with joy and reckless abandonment like we all should be doing, right? Because when I was younger, we didn't have social media in that way. So in a lot of ways, like I would really only ever feel safe and seen when I was with my two spirit family. Though you know, you have to back in the day, you'd have to travel to go and do those types of things. The joy of even something like you're doing right now, Robin, is bringing this representation to whomever is able to witness this. That's the power of how we can use social media in this way to let some young kid in Georgia or in Alabama or North Dakota or wherever they may be watching, California, here in California, to say like, I am not alone. And look at that. Look at Robin and look at Raj. They, you know, they're now they can look at me and say, you know, well, the truth is we can get to this in a moment, but I'm like an elder now in the two spirit world, and I'm only in my late 40s. But because of what happened to so many of my, you know, to me, so many two spirit folk, someone like me is now that age, so I can represent to young folks like you can grow up two spirit, you can grow up gender nonconforming, and you can thrive. You can thrive in your later life. It does, as cliched as it sounds, it does get better. It doesn't necessarily get easier. It doesn't get easier, but it gets better because we love ourselves more. We
Mm,
believe our truth more. We center ourselves in our truth more as we get older because we recognize the other stuff doesn't matter as much. What matters is living our truth, being as authentic as we possibly can. And authenticity is nothing but the intersection of trusting who you are and the truth to go out and live it. That's authenticity.
yeah. Um, so our first exhibition is called Vessels, or our first event after this is going to be our exhibition called Vessels, which I think you heard a little bit about. It's going to center gender diversity through depiction of trans, genderqueer, intersex, non-binary bodies in ways that have historically only shown like cis bodies. So I've told the artists involved, and when I put the call out, to think of like Michelangelo's David, but
Mm,
how perceptions might have changed if it depicted a trans body instead of this westernized like masculinity, or something like maybe the statue of Venus, which celebrated
mm-hmm,
femininity.
mm-hmm,
In what ways can we like accomplish the vision of diversity at a similar magnitude, but through this kind of artwork? Um, So this is the event that we're fundraising for with this live stream, and I wanted to ask, what is something that you would want to see come out of this exhibition, from like your perspective, um, in whatever identities that you hold or whatever professional um, experience that you hold as well. Any perspective that you would like to bring. What would you like to see come out of this exhibition?
I'm almost getting like this visual in my head of as folks enter a virtual space or a physical space, that they're like sort of stepping through a portal, if you will. And once they step through that portal, suddenly all of their jaws are going to drop, just like you and I had that moment. Their jaws are going to drop for one, to realize I'm not alone, or I never knew anything like this ever existed, or I feel seen. Um, and I think like it's so important to think about, my work largely is around bodies. I do a lot of work with bodies, and I think it's just so fascinating to the potential that this exhibition has to challenge our beliefs around what is a trans body, or a two-spirit body, or a non-binary body, an intersex body. I think depending on the generation in which you come from, this is how we're cultured. Let's say if we asked my mom, who's a lovely, very, very open-minded human being, relatively speaking, if I were to say, Mom, tell me what like a trans person would look like, my mom would probably say, oh, and she'd probably give like very feminine sort of ideas of like what a trans person should look like. Okay, if you ask someone my generation, they might get a little more punk in their answer and be like, well, it's this whole genderqueer thing and fuck the power, and maybe someone in your generation might be like, it can be whatever you want it to be. So we can see how things have changed. And I think that might also be important, is to capture, like, if this is what David was, if this is what the Venus was, and these were our representations, and why are they like why are we celebrating like these sort of white bodied individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
As like the ones that hold up these ideas of masculinity and femininity, and really recognize like the role that colonization has played in shaping and misinforming us about the potential of the human experience, right? Because colonization teaches us that there is a binary, and if you don't fit into it, you will likely be killed. This is, I mean, we only have to look at the laws that they're trying to enact these days to say that this is also another example why I say colonization isn't over. They're still trying to enforce these Western ideas onto bodies like mine, bodies like yours. And what I'll always remind folks of is that a two-spirit body is more indigenous. A trans body is more indigenous, lowercase I now, is more indigenous to these lands than transphobia or racism will ever be, because we were here first. And before the settlers came, people like me were part of the community. We were fulfilling roles in our community. We were not shunned. We were not cast out. We were celebrated. We were needed. We were centered. And that's why we say in the two-spirit circle, we say we cannot fully decolonize until everyone is in the circle. And I would say the same thing for non-native folks too. We will never get to a point of real harmonious interactions with one another if we exclude our trans relatives. If we exclude our non-binary relatives, our two-spirit relatives, it's not going to happen, because if we leave anyone out, we're leaving a part of ourselves out. That's not complete. We need to fight for everyone to be centered together.
Absolutely. That reminds me of, I'm actually writing my senior thesis right now, on Hijras, which is the oldest community of transgender people in the world, is in India. And unfortunately, that community was changed drastically with colonization. And
Yes.
I'm learning a lot about it right now for that thesis, which I won't go into now. It's a lot of information.
Yes,
For
my
this time period.
anthropology professor in college, that was his specialty. Was he specialized in that community actually. So my
Wow.
first year in as an undergrad in anthropology, well, it was like one semester, but I learned a lot about Hijra community just because of that professor. And it to me, even to see that representation to me excited me because it was like, yeah, I want to learn as much as I can about gender variance in any culture because it's fascinating. It's fascinating, right? It's fascinating.
It is very fascinating, and it's just really cool to see how the communities are so similar around the world and also so different.
Yes.
There's a lot of very distinct differences um, in all of these communities across the world, but there's also like a shared connection. You're like me too, which is
Yeah.
it's just really cool to see it across everything. There's still connection there. I believe you said it is valid to question and understand the role of culture in our bodily experiences. What are some questions each of us can ask ourselves to start this path of understanding?
The first thing that I would suggest people do is ask themselves, is this mine? Meaning,
Mm,
when something is evocative to me, or a common word people use is triggered. When I get triggered by something, what's triggering to me? Um, and the way that I understand that is that culture is something that we learn because it's taught to us. And sociologists, if you've ever studied sociology, uh, they have this concept called a primary and a secondary socialization. And a primary socialization, for those that don't know, is those are generally like your parents if you were raised with your parents and or your primary caregivers of some kind. Could be extended family, grandparents, other people who raised you, what have you. That's your primary socialization. Those are the things that we learn that, my family does it this way. And then we have something called secondary socialization. And that is usually our exposure to a school for the first time, or for some folks, like if they go to church for the first time, or if you like have the privilege, if you're young, to travel to a different country and learn a different culture. And we will have secondary socialization the rest of our life because we're always kind of being reintroduced to new things. So, what do we do with that information? If in my home I was raised as, and this is true for me, I was raised as a Catholic, so I learned that there are certain ways to behave, that to be in alignment with, you know, Sky Daddy, right? I had to
yes.
do these things to be in alignment with Sky Daddy, and if I didn't, I was a bad person. So then, if I went to your house, Robin, and you weren't Catholic, and you didn't say a prayer before your meal, I might look at you and go, "What's wrong with you? You all didn't pray." But your family maybe doesn't pray. So suddenly now I'm judging you based upon how I was cultured. But that has nothing to do with you. That's my stuff. But I'm trying to push it onto you. And that's what happens a lot with issues around gender, is that someone tries to force us to be like them and say, well, here's how I think it should be done. So that's when I say, like, is this mine? Do I really believe that? Do I really believe that uh, trans folks should not be in sports? Right? No, of course I don't believe that. I believe that people should be able to play sports if they want to. If I was cultured that particular way, I'm gonna kind of dig down into that. And so we have to ask, is this mine? We have to get to the root of, where did this ideology come from? What value am I rubbing up against here when I feel triggered, or when I feel some kind of something that feels evocative in my life? That's where I always start. And then I want to ask myself, if it's not mine, now I've got some space. If I can separate and say, this isn't mine. And I like to actually use my hands to do that kind of stuff because it's very somatic, very body oriented. I'm
Mm,
coming across something and I feel very evocative, and I go, wait, this isn't mine. This is not mine. And I'll move my hands away from my body. This is not my stuff. I've got this space now. I can go, what is mine? I believe in liberation. I believe in peace. I believe in equality. Okay, center myself, ground myself in my own values before I respond back to someone. Most of the time, I have found I don't respond anymore at all. I was much more vocal when I was in my youth, But now as an adult, like I said earlier, I'm a little more centered in who I am as a person. I don't feel the need to defend myself as much. Only because I'll defend others. I will fight for others more than I would for myself, because I've already fought for myself enough to be able to stand firm on,
Yeah.
in my feet, to be like, you ain't gonna fuck with me, and you ain't gonna fuck with Robin either, right? So some people, and I don't want to say it's that they haven't found their voice, because that's not fair to people. Sometimes folks don't know how to use their voice, or
I think we lost the audio for a second.
Okay, can you hear me again?
Yes.
I think my headphones just died on me.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's really that idea of, how do I take my values and use them in a way to recognize that if I'm really, and another thing, culture is, we made culture up. Culture is made up. So we can create a new one. We can create a new culture, which is what you're doing, Robin, which is what you are putting out in the world, is you're saying, we can create a new culture. We can build community in this way. And that's how cultural shifts happen. People like you stand up and say, I'm going to try to make a difference in the world, and I'm going to get together a group of folks who are like me, and I'm going to share their voices so others know that they're not alone. And when you know you're not alone, when you find your community, you get together and you make change happen.
Absolutely. In what ways do you think our current understanding of culture can apply to or affect the experience of gender?
Well, I don't think people have studied enough, to be honest with you. I'm lucky in the fact that I have a PhD in human sexuality. So I have read a lot about gender, culture, how it's been constructed, how we've thought about it. I've also dug a little bit deeper and looked at the way colonization has impacted the way we think about gender. And that's really only from the Native perspective. So I am really fairly versed on the way that we understand gender and sexuality from a Native perspective, inclusive of cis folk, inclusive of trans, non-binary, and two-spirit folk. And by the way, not all folks who are Native and queer would use the term two-spirit. I forgot to say that. So just because someone's Native doesn't mean they're automatically two-spirit. That's a term that you choose. A lot of younger folk use the term indigiqueer, which I also really love.
I think that was fun too.
It's a side topic, but that's just to say that, right? We have to educate ourselves. And by educate, I don't mean you need to have a college degree or you need to have a PhD. I mean, you have to understand that you don't know everything. And that's okay, right? If we can get rid of our ignorance and recognize you're not ever going to know everything. Oftentimes, what really trips me out sometimes is to go into spaces, queer spaces, and you'll hear people rallying, and then I might raise my hand and I might go, well, what about the indigenous perspective? Crickets. It's like, oh, you all weren't including indigenous people. Got it. Or you could say like, oh, you weren't including Black folk, or you weren't including Latino folk, or in the larger LGBT community, oh, you weren't including our trans relatives. You weren't including our intersex folks. Because people leave us out all the time. Our own community leaves us out because they don't know, because they haven't been educated. And Robin, I can't tell you the number of times I've got into fights with cis white gay men who believe that they are somehow more marginalized in life than I am. It's like, what are you talking about? You are more marginalized than I am. I mean, one, it's not a competition. I'm not in a marginalization competition with you. So why you have to prove to me that you've been more marginalized? And I knew this one person once who said to me, well, when these people come after, they come after us, they're not coming after people like you. They're coming after people that look like me. Ooh. And I was like, they're coming after people that look like you because they don't even think I exist.
Yeah.
They don't.
No.
They think I'm already dead. Like, that's why they're going after you, because they think they killed all the people that look like me. And you think so too, because you're not even advocating for me right now. And I'm sitting at the same fucking table that you are. And it's ignorance. And I don't believe that we should be treating ignorance like it's some big bad word, right? I'm ignorant about a lot of things. And when someone points out my ignorance, I don't get defensive. I just go, oh my God, I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And if I say something ignorant, I will say, I did not realize that was an ignorant statement. Please accept my apologies. But it's when we like double down on our ignorance that is a culture in and of itself. The culture of ignorance should be the title of my second book.
That would be, I would read that. That would be really interesting.
I think I'd read that too. The culture of
Yeah,
ignorance. I love that.
I love that. Yeah. So much to think about.
Yeah.
So much to think about.
And just to name, Robin, you have a lot of time, right? And folks that may be watching today is like, we have so much time if we're lucky. If we're lucky, we have time. And so at whatever age you are today, you do not have to have it all figured out. Hopefully you will have the rest of your life to explore what your gender means to you and how through your exploration and deeper understanding of yourself, you may be able to help someone else. I have committed to a lifelong path of growth and challenging myself to rid myself of ignorance, to practice decolonization, to practice unsettling. And I hope I never finish. I hope I never get there. Because then what am I going to do then? Nothing, to sit around and twiddle my thumbs. I want to constantly learn and grow and be challenged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned like lack of education and ignorance as like a big part of the issue that our community as trans, genderqueer, intersex, non-binary, two-spirit people kind of face as a whole. That's kind of the whole purpose, actually, of our project as a museum and community center is we wanted to create this welcoming place where people could step in and not really fear or not really have to fear someone like shouting at them for say misgendering or something like that. This is a place where people are invited to voluntarily step in to learn about all of our communities, maybe take part in events or be there to support their family members that they may not know anything about who are coming out as one of these identities. We really want to shift the narrative through just being an open, welcoming place for people to learn more. We really do believe in exactly what you said, that misinformation, miseducation, or a lack of education is really what drives this hatred and this just not knowing about what we really are or who we really are. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
I just had another thought here, Robin, which is, it's almost as if, I think when folks experience any kind of transphobia, homophobia, gender phobia, I think it has something to do with a feeling they have within themselves. That does not necessarily mean that they are part of our rainbow family.
Yes.
So if I like the way, because let's just pretend that I'm a cis straight man, it ain't gonna happen, but please use your imagination broadly, if you will. I'm a cis straight man right now.
Pretend.
Right? And suddenly I feel the soft fabric of silk. And I go, oh, that feels so, I want to wear that. How lovely. But if I wear that, someone's going to think that I'm, right? And it's like, well, that doesn't mean, and you know, and then so I'm not going to wear it and I'm going to push it away and I'm going to try to ban silk shirts, right? It's sort of like, well, that doesn't mean that you're trans or gender non-binary or anything, or that you're gay or lesbian. It just means you like the touch of soft things. But because we've been cultured to believe that pink means that it's girly, and boy means it's you know, blue means it's for boys, and rough, rugged scents are for men, and flowers are for women. It's like, what the heck? What have we done? What have we done that we've taken nature and said, flowers are for women and men must go amongst the pine trees? It's like, what? This is bizarre that we do this. So the ignorance that people carry is not just about others, it's about themselves. They think sometimes, not everybody, but sometimes people think that if I like something that a two-spirit person likes or a trans person likes, I might be that too. And I want to reject that part of myself. When the reality is like, no, you've been cultured to believe that those things are bad, and you've stifled that part of who you are. I love the rocker Lenny Kravitz. If you know who Lenny Kravitz is, if not, just Google a picture of Lenny Kravitz. He is like a rock star who, to me, is like sort of like a modern David Bowie. Who David Bowie was playing around with gender and presentation for a really long time. And what I love about Lenny Kravitz is that, you know, he's really thought of as like this really sexy, cis, kind of womanizer, rock and roll kind of person. Though when you look at Lenny Kravitz has got their nails done. They're in. It's Zoe Kravitz's dad. So your generation might know Zoe Kravitz a little bit more. It's Zoe's father. For those that don't know Zoe Kravitz, Zoe Kravitz was the Catwoman in the most recent Batman movie. Anywho, her dad is this huge rock star named Lenny Kravitz. And when you look at Lenny, he's got like, you know, I would look at him and go like, you seem like you are so open and fluid with your gender. And that's what I love about Lenny Kravitz is he don't give a shit. He's just going to live his life and be like, I like this stuff, so I'm wearing it. That to me is authenticity. Lenny Kravitz is not afraid to be authentic if he likes something that someone else might deem feminine. Lenny don't care. Lenny don't, because it's not who Lenny is. Lenny knows who he is, or at least that's the image that I believe, right? Yeah. And so there's this idea that if I like something, in my book, actually, I have a little passage about how when I was a kid, one of the ways that people used to make fun of me was they would call me a sissy or femme or use genitalia pejoratives on me, right? And it was always, to me, I was always sort of like, I know I know you mean that as some sort of insult to me. You know, like calling me a femme or a sissy is supposedly insulting, right? But for me, it's sort of like, no, I love my mom, I love my sisters, and they're amazing, and I love women in general. So calling me a sissy is actually a compliment. Thank you, because women are beautiful and powerful and all the things, right?
Yeah.
So what I about in my book is like, I think the term that most of those kind of folks, those gender phobes or those homophobes, really should be using is either anus or asshole, because in reality, they, cis straight men, supposedly love the genitalia of people that, you know, that they assume are female. So why would you call me something that you supposedly love so much?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Why would you call me that? Like, don't you love that? Isn't that what you covet the most in the world? So why would that be a bad thing? I think what you mean is asshole, because sometimes you get pleasure from that part of your body and you can't handle that about yourself because we've been cultured to believe that anal pleasure is only for gay people. It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, you start using the term asshole because it actually properly better reflects what you mean. Because the other word, it's not actually, it's meant to be offensive, but it's actually, for some of us, it's actually incredibly empowering. It's like, you see my femininity? Thank you. I am really pretty. Thank you very much. You know, it's like, it's not an insult to me. To be called a femme is not insulting, or to be called sissy is not insulting to me. It's an insulting term. I know what they mean by it, but to me, I don't take offense to it because I believe women are powerful. I believe women are the center of really the universe. So why would I be insulted that you're somehow comparing me to a woman and making me try to feel less than? Like, you're empowering me with those words. You see my two-spirit nature when you say that. Thank you. Yes, that is who I am. So I think the word you want is asshole, because that's actually what you're the most afraid of, is the pleasure you get when you take a shit. That's what you're most afraid of, and you want to come and attack a person like me. So, you know, it's just like ridiculous.
All of the comments are going to be like, yes, preach. yeah, you mentioned your book. Let's talk about your book, Somacultural Liberation. How
Yes.
would you define somacultural? I have never heard that term before.
So
I'm sure our audience, some of them may not know either.
that's right. Soma is the Greek word for body. So whenever you see the word soma or somatics, just know that it's referring to the body. So soma cultural is a term that I use to really look at the way that culture is shaping and informing the experiences that we have within our body. An example of this would be if I were to walk into like a straight sports bar, which really is probably never going to happen. But if I were to walk into one of those places, I would likely feel like everybody's suddenly looking at me and my body might feel really small. And I might actually do things where I would, bring my chest in a little bit and I might shrink down a little bit so people don't see me as much. That's what I mean by somacultural, the way culture shapes and informs our bodily experiences. Though if I went into a room with a bunch of Two-Spirit and Rainbow Family, my body does this. I'm open, I'm free, I'm happy, I can see you, right? So it's understanding the way like, oh, and I my body reacts the way that it does here because of the culture that's prevalent in this moment. And again,
Mm.
that's where I kind of look at and go, wait, this isn't mine. If I walk into that straight bar and everybody's looking at me, it's because I have fabulous clothes on. That's the only reason they're looking, because I look good. Because I look good, right? That's right. That's why they're looking. Um, and that's
I
just now
have,
choose to believe. And somacultural liberation is about the way in which we can learn about our culture, learn about how it impacts the body, and use that as a tool to free ourselves a little bit more. My book is not a be all end all. If you read it, you're going to learn a lot of great helpful things. It might change your life. I hope it does, though it is just one of the many steps that you will need to take in order to get closer to liberation. And my book is not necessary to do that. It's just one of the ways that might help you better understand yourself in order to do that. That's kind of what I
well,
always felt was missing from this, from like the self-help, the liberation kind of movement is like, there's no personal accountability here. And so somacultural liberation asks us through a series of exercises that people do to get to know yourself more so you know how you show up in the world and you know what you're capable of. You know where your strengths are, and you also then will learn where your growth edges are. So you can do the work necessary to do so that you can help other people do that work as well. And one final thing I'll say about that is we do not have to have everything figured out before we help someone else. Though we should be in the process of doing the same thing for ourselves. I strongly believe that.
absolutely. Um, in the description of the book, it says that it's a revolutionary ideology to explore how our bodies offer portals to personal and collective freedom. I can see how, I mean, it makes sense to me. Our bodies are personal, so personal freedom makes sense to me. I definitely would like to learn more about how it connects with collective freedom, though, because that was a new kind of idea. I've never thought of it that way. How would you describe that?
Well, in Western culture, such as the United States, we are cultured as an individualistic society. And so we are taught, we are cultured, another way to say that, we are cultured to strive for independence. Even though we're all trapped by a system, though we're believed, it's believed that there's this myth of the American dream, right? That you can come to America and you can build this life for yourself and your family. What we saw, what the reality is that left so many people out of that the possibility of that American dream.
Mm.
And so is that really liberation? If that person can live in the house on the corner, I can't afford that, right? By the way, that's my grandma's land, right? And so it's like, how are you going to say that that individual is free when there's somebody starving in the street? To me, that's not liberation. Liberation is not an individual thing. Liberation is not privilege. Liberation means we've let go of privilege. We don't have to have privilege anymore because everybody has an equal and equitable stake in the game of life, which unfortunately, I don't know that I'm ever going to see that in my lifetime, but I'm going to keep fighting for it. I'm going to keep fighting for it. So Soma cultural liberation, and I name this in the book, is that the work is for you to do on your own, Robin, so that you can join me and you can join others in collective. Because if you show up and you haven't done your anti-racist work and you haven't done your anti-trans work or your anti-indigenous work, you ain't coming to my party. I ain't got time to teach you along the way, Robin. You have to be, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be at the same level that everybody is. You have got to have already started. So, you know, I think that, and what I mean, that's why it starts with the individual. Start with yourself, do your own work, dive into your own self, and then be able to extend out to someone else. And then it becomes this little ripple. I love that, the imagery of like this, you know, the throwing the stone into the water and those ripples that come out, right? And we sort of often talk about like being the ripples that are in the world. And I think like I'm not even in the water yet. I'm still on the shore holding the rock. Like that's where I'm at in my evolution. I love the idea that someday maybe the stone I throw will cast some ripples, though arguably, I mean, I'm very touched that you asked me to be here. And I'm very touched in general when folks invite me to speak and think that I have something important to say. Because when I think about my own life, I just think like, gosh, I have so much work to do. There's so much I don't understand about the world and so much I don't understand about how things work. And so that's why I always just want to say, like, I can't do it alone. How could I ever be liberated fully if I don't know all there is to know? Or if I don't know how I can help someone? If I'm so consumed with my own life and, you know, it's not going to be helpful for anything. So I also name in my book that even though the book is written from the perspective of someone that is two-spirit, you will learn a lot about two-spirit. There's a whole chapter on two-spirit people in the book. It's called What is Two-Spirit? I think it might be chapter 5. And then throughout the book, I have interwoven my own personal stories, narratives throughout. And I've also woven in the history, some of the histories that Native American people have experienced in what we now call the United States and Canada. And so what I say in the book is that this is the perspective of someone that, you know, is Native, specifically someone that's Porch Creek. I do not know enough about what it would look like to talk about so much immigration from an Asian perspective, because I'm not Asian, or from a Black perspective, or from a Jewish perspective, or a Muslim perspective, or a Palestinian perspective. I don't know. So I invite others to join me in this so that we can collectively learn together. And now oh, wow, I did not know that about Palestinian people. Oh, I did not know that about Jewish people. Wow, this is fascinating, right? And so now the more we know, the more we can grow. And that's why collective is a necessary component for liberation. We cannot do it alone. No one person could ever liberate the entire system. It's impossible. So we need every one of us that possibly can to join the movement for liberation for all.
So it starts with us learning more about ourselves and about and doing like our own internal decolonization work and deconstruction.
Unsettling. I would call it unsettling work because decolonization is inherently tied to land, right? So like usually when people talk about decolonization, I sometimes think they get it wrong because it's sort of like, well, if you're not Indigenous and or if you're not Black, you're not really decolonizing. You are unsettling because you come from a settler family. Your family are settlers in these lands, right? So you all unsettle. And then I, as someone that's mixed biracial, I unsettle and I decolonize. So we can work toward it. You can work and help me work toward a decolonized future as you are unsettling. It's a you know, they kind of work in tandem together, but they're different and they mean very different things to people. And whenever I hear people talk about decolonization and they do not include an Indigenous voice in that conversation, I just yell out, that's not decolonization. If you haven't included an Indigenous person, What are you talking about? You know, I used to have this colleague who used to wear this T-shirt that said, "Decolonize your syllabus." And I was like, I mean, I get the sentiment. I get what you mean by that. And what the hell do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by that? Like putting like a native author on your required reading list is not an act of decolonization. It's not. An act of decolonization would be to sell your fucking building and give the land back to the native people. That's decolonization, right? That's decolonization. Not profiting off of the lands that someone stole and you build your university on, and you're charging students exorbitant amount of monies to have them read a book about native people. That is perpetuating capitalism, right? That's not decolonization. And folks think that you can just throw that word around, like decolonize this, decolonize that. It has to be tied to Indigenous people, or it has to be tied to Black folk, or it has to be tied to liberation movements of some kind. It has to be tied, you know, and when I say Indigenous, I'm including our Indigenous relatives in Central America here as well, right? So I'm not just referring to Indigenous as what we know in the United States. This is, you know, we're talking about Canada, the US, and Central America here. That's what's important to recognize when we say decolonization. I just want to make that very clear to folks. In my work, I make a really clear distinction between the two, between decolonization and unsettling, because different bodies will be doing different things.
Yes, absolutely. I have one last question. I know we're kind of running up on time. What are some things that you hope readers would take away from your book? So anyone who reads, what do you want them to get out of it?
Well, I hope that they feel moved, like personally, like just as like a personal thing. Like, I hope people feel moved by the stories that I have chosen to share, personal stories, because some of the stories are very personal in there. And I hope that they feel inspired by the growth work exercises that they can do. And I hope they feel curious to want to learn more about Native American people and Two-Spirit people, and really question the system that led them to not knowing anything about Native people. And by the way, just to say that for folks, if you don't already know the territory of the land that you are on, native-land.net is an amazing resource that will actually give you information about the Native people on whose land you're now occupying. So I think that, yeah, I want people to be moved. I want them to be inspired, and I want them to be curious. And then after all of that is over, I want them to say, and damn, Raj, you can write.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, honestly, Rogen, sometimes when I've gone back and read my book, I must have read it like probably 10 times now between all the editings. Sometimes I'll be like, that was really good. Like, I don't remember writing that. I don't remember writing that. But I know that I did because I'm the one that wrote the book. But sometimes I even get surprised by my own use of the English language, that, you know, I'm like, wow, that was a really good statement, Raj. Like, and so I hope people read my book and go, okay, yeah, Roger Kuhn actually knows what's going on, and they've written a really well, solid, cited book, right? A lot of the things that I also use a lot of citations in my book to like back myself up, to say that, you know, this isn't just me extrapolating; it's actually someone else has said it too. So that's what I hope that people really get out of it, is that inspiration and curiosity, and I want them to feel. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone who's been watching you, and what if they want to learn more? Where can they find you?
The best spot is go to my website, www.rogerkuhn.com, ROGERKUHN.com. That is my website that kind of has my book, and I'm also a musician, so there's all my music on there. And then there's also another website, rogerjkuhn.com. That's more like my professional website, my therapy website, and my book is on both of those websites, so doesn't really matter which one you go to. Though most people these days, I'm like, no, go check my music out. I'm a musician. I have fun making music, and that's kind of what I'm doing these days. I mean, I'm also I'm on a bit of a sabbatical, but I'm about to go back to clinical work very soon. But lately, I've just been making music, and I've been on the road and singing songs, and doing my thing. So that's the best place. And then I'm also on Instagram and also on Facebook too. I don't use X. And if I remember, sometimes I'll post on Threads, but I barely remember to do that. But if you want to see cute pictures of my dog and this beautiful tree that's in my yard, I would say follow me on Instagram, and those would be the best places to get in touch with me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we will also put the I'm still very new to this, but we're going to be able to put the links in, I think, the
Oh yeah.
description as well, and share
Yeah.
everything about you. So if anyone's watching and they want to learn more and they didn't catch all of the letters and everything, then you should just be able to click the link somewhere. Um, yeah.
Yes.
Any final comments that you would like to share?
Well, the only thing that I guess that I will share is I'd love to teach you all a word in the Muskoke language, which is Mado. It's spelled MVTO, and that means thank you. So I would encourage, as someone that's actually from Georgia, from Muskoke territory, Robin, I would say you could start saying Mado. Or even better, like if you know the native language and where you're living, if they have a word for thank you, when you go places, start using it. That's an act of unsettling, right? So we are so used to speaking colonial languages. Thank you, gracias, merci, danke. We say thank you in European languages in this country all the time, right? English and Spanish are both colonial languages. So we can say thank you and gracias, or we could say Mado.
I will start using
Mado.
that. That's fun. All
Yes.
right. Well, thank you so much for participating in this. Again, we're so thankful to have you. Your perspective, your voice, it means a lot to us that you came and joined us for this. So I just wanted to
A
say
true
thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.